I didn't intend to change the alien princess's life. Yet now she smiles because of me. Eli stepped carefully through the dense forest of Thaloria, his boots sinking slightly into the soft moss that covered the ground. The air smelled of wet leaves and a faint metallic tang that reminded him of rain on iron. This was his first time exploring outside the human settlement, and he felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The mission was simple: observe the native environment and collect data. But for Eli, everything about this alien world felt alive, almost watching him back. He adjusted the straps of his backpack and checked the small floating drone hovering beside him. Its sensors were quietly mapping the flora, transmitting readings to his wrist console. Thaloria was unlike any planet humanity had encountered. Trees reached heights Eli could hardly measure, their trunks glowing faintly at the base, and vines twisted in shapes that defied geometry. Strange, bird-like creatures flitted between branches, leaving trails of sparkling dust in their wake. Eli paused to record the data, tapping a few keys. His attention was drawn to a soft rustling nearby. At first, he thought it was one of the forest creatures, but then he saw her. She moved gracefully among the trees, her skin shimmering with a pearlescent sheen that caught the dim sunlight. Eli froze. This was no ordinary alien. She had an air of authority, an elegance he had not expected to see outside the palace walls. The princess. He hadn't intended to meet her. Eli had been told by his superiors to avoid contact with the royal family unless it was formally arranged. But here she was, alone, crouched by a small stream and sketching something on a thin, glowing tablet. Her long fingers moved with precision, and her eyes, large and violet, reflected both curiosity and a hint of loneliness. Eli's first instinct was to hide, but something inside him urged him forward. He wanted to see her work, to understand this moment. Carefully, he stepped on a fallen branch, and it snapped under his weight. The princess looked up, her eyes widening slightly. Eli froze, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. I didn't mean to disturb," he said softly, unsure if she could understand him. She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. Eli frowned. Maybe she didn't speak any language he knew. He took a small notebook from his backpack, scribbled a rough drawing of himself, and pointed to it. Then he pointed at her. Slowly, her lips curved into something resembling a smile. It was cautious, almost hidden, but genuine. Eli felt a small rush of relief. He returned the smile and sat down at a respectful distance. Minutes passed as neither of them spoke. Words seemed unnecessary. Eli began to imitate her sketches, drawing the shapes of the glowing trees and the bird-like creatures in his notebook. She watched, her head tilted, and then began to draw faster, almost laughing silently at his clumsy attempts. Eli laughed too, a light, nervous sound that echoed slightly through the forest. For a moment, the tension between worlds, the rules, the distance, the unknown, dissolved. After some time, Eli reached into his backpack and pulled out a small device that projected a holographic globe. He tapped it, and tiny shapes moved around the globe, showing the movement of creatures in the forest. The princess's eyes widened in fascination. She reached out hesitantly, and when her fingers touched the glowing shapes, a tiny gasp escaped her lips. Eli smiled. He had no idea if she understood what he was showing, but her reaction told him she did. Hours passed unnoticed. Eli and the princess created a small world between them, built with gestures, drawings, and shared glances. He pointed at a tree, then mimicked its movement. She copied him, exaggerating the sway of the branches, and Eli laughed at the sight. Then she pointed to a strange creature, one with 3 wings, and made a small buzzing sound. Eli tried to imitate it, failing miserably, but she didn't seem to mind. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows through the forest. Eli realized he needed to return to the settlement before dark. He stood slowly, careful not to startle her. "I should go now," he said softly, hoping she would understand. She nodded, and for a brief moment her smile widened. Eli felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't expected. He turned and began walking back, his backpack feeling heavier, not with supplies but with a sense of wonder. As he walked, Eli glanced back. The princess had returned to her sketches, but he noticed she kept looking up as if remembering him. He wondered what her life must be like, confined by duties, watched by countless advisors, yet finding a small moment of freedom in the forest. He had not intended to interfere, yet somehow he had given her something precious, a small human connection. That night, Eli lay in his sleeping quarters, replaying the day in his mind. The data he collected felt secondary now. The image of the princess smiling, the faint sparkle in her eyes, lingered. He thought about how different her world was from his own, how structured, how constrained. And he wondered if humans, with their curiosity and openness, could somehow show her a different way to live, even if in small steps. The next morning, Eli returned to the forest. His heart raced with anticipation, but he reminded himself to be patient. The princess might not be there. She might not want to see him again. But as he stepped into the clearing, he saw her silhouette, just as he had the day before, seated and sketching. This time, he tried something new. He drew a small figure on a piece of paper, showing himself handing her a tiny flower. Then he held it up and smiled. The princess paused, looked at the drawing and then at him. Her lips curved into a genuine smile, larger this time, and she held out her hand. In her palm rested a tiny, glowing seed from one of the forest plants. Eli took it gently, understanding the gesture as a gift. It was a silent agreement between them, a promise of friendship, a beginning of trust. For Eli, this small seed symbolized more than the plant it came from. It represented connection, empathy, and the chance to make a difference without force or command. Over the next several days, their meetings became routine. Eli would bring small human objects, a compass, a book with pictures of Earth, a tiny mirror. Each time, Lysera would react with curiosity, touching and examining the items. In return, she shared pieces of her world, sketches, small musical sounds made with her voice, and secret spots in the forest that humans were not allowed to see. Through these exchanges, Eli realized the princess's life was far more restricted than he had imagined. Royal duties, endless protocols, and expectations had left her with little room for personal choice. But with him, she laughed, explored, and simply existed for herself. And for the first time, Eli felt the weight of responsibility, not as a scientist observing an alien species, but as someone who could influence a life positively. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled in. Dark clouds covered the sky, and heavy rain began to fall. Eli instinctively pulled his jacket tighter, but the princess did not move. She simply tilted her head, letting the rain hit her face. Eli rushed to her side, offering his jacket. She accepted it, wrapping herself awkwardly but with a shy smile. "Humans, we do strange things in rain," he said softly. She tilted her head, listening to the sound of his voice, and then laughed. It was a musical, bright sound that blended with the patter of the rain. Eli felt a swell of happiness, knowing he had been part of this small, joyful moment in her life. As the storm passed, Eli helped her back to a safe spot near the palace boundary. She looked at him, eyes full of gratitude. No words were needed. The bond between them had grown strong in silence, gestures, and shared experiences. He realized that even without formal introductions or grand gestures, small acts could change a life. Before leaving, Eli handed her a small notebook, filled with sketches of things he had seen on Thaloria. "For you," he said. She accepted it with both hands, her fingers brushing his, and for the first time he saw unguarded emotion on her face, a simple human smile that spoke volumes. That night, Eli recorded his observations in the settlement log, but his notes were different from usual. Instead of focusing on flora and fauna, he wrote about connection, empathy, and the small impact humans could have on other beings. The princess's smile stayed with him as he wrote, a reminder that even unintended actions could create joy. Eli didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he would see the princess again, or if his presence could continue to influence her life. But for the first time, he understood that exploration wasn't just about discovering new worlds. It was about discovering new ways to touch lives, even in ways one never intended. And as he drifted off to sleep, he imagined the princess, sketching quietly by the stream, her smile lingering like sunlight on water, a small victory born from curiosity, kindness, and the gentle presence of another being who cared. Days passed after Eli's first meetings with Princess Lysera, and each day their bond quietly grew. Eli had returned to the forest with the same sense of wonder, but now there was anticipation, a small excitement that pushed him to explore further. He wondered what he could share with her today, what small piece of human life might spark another smile. Lysera was waiting. She sat near the stream, her long fingers tracing shapes in the water. The glow of the forest filtered through her translucent hair, making her appear almost like she was part of the natural world itself. When she saw Eli, she didn't speak. She didn't need to, but her eyes brightened, and that was enough. Eli approached slowly, holding a small wooden box. "I brought something," he said softly. He opened the box to reveal tiny mechanical birds, no larger than his fist. With a gentle flick, they flapped their wings and hopped along the ground. Lysera gasped, her eyes wide with delight. She leaned closer, carefully touching one of the birds. The tiny machine leapt and landed on her palm, and for a moment she laughed, a high, clear sound that made Eli's heart lift. "You like it?" he asked, smiling. She nodded vigorously, her expression full of joy. She reached into her satchel and handed him a small, folded sketch. It was of the birds, flying among the glowing trees. Eli studied it carefully, amazed by her attention to detail. Her world, her imagination, was precise, yet full of life. He realized that while she lived in a highly structured society, her mind was free to create and explore in ways he could only begin to understand. Eli spent hours with her that day, showing her simple human inventions, a spinning top, a small wind-up music box, and even a tiny mirror. Each new object was met with curiosity and wonder. In turn, Lysera shared pieces of her own life, the games she used to play as a child, hidden paths in the forest, and secret sketches she kept from the palace. Through these exchanges, Eli began to notice subtle changes in the princess. Her movements were freer, less restrained by the invisible rules of her royal life. She laughed more easily, and her eyes sparkled in ways that had been hidden when he first saw her. The small human gestures, unintended though they might have been, were giving her something that she had not had in years, a sense of choice, even if just for a few hours each day. One afternoon, Eli brought something different. It was a small, handheld globe that projected scenes from Earth, forests, oceans, mountains, and cities. He tapped it and the images shifted slowly, showing animals running, waves crashing, and clouds moving across the sky. Lysera's eyes widened in amazement. She reached out, touching the surface as if she could feel the wind and water. "Where is this?" she asked, her voice hesitant, careful. "Earth," Eli replied. "My home. It's far from here, but I wanted you to see what it looks like." "What humans see, what humans feel." Eli explained in simple terms what humans did in each place, how they learned, how they created. The princess listened, fascinated, as if discovering a new world beyond even her imagination. Over the next few days, Eli began teaching her small games, puzzles, simple problem-solving tasks, and exercises in creativity. They worked together to build tiny structures from sticks and leaves, made patterns in the dirt, and experimented with shadows and reflections from the glowing plants. Each activity was met with curiosity, laughter, and a growing sense of freedom. Lysera was learning to enjoy choice, to explore without expectation, and Eli was learning the subtle art of patience, how to guide without forcing, how to inspire without commanding. The palace guards noticed small changes in the princess. She moved differently, her posture less stiff, her expressions more open. They whispered to each other but did not intervene, perhaps unsure of the cause. The advisors were more cautious. Change in Thaloria's royal court was slow, deliberate, and highly monitored. Yet, despite the rules and expectations, Lysera found moments of joy, and Eli found moments of profound connection. One morning, Eli arrived with a small tablet that could record images and sound. "I thought you might like to see yourself in a new way," he said, showing her how to use it. Lysera was hesitant at first, unsure of how to handle the strange human device. But when she saw her reflection in the recording framed by the glowing forest, she smiled, a quiet, thoughtful smile that held years of hidden emotion. "You look happy," Eli said softly. Lysera's eyes met his and she nodded almost imperceptibly. She didn't need words. Eli understood. She was discovering something she had almost forgotten. That happiness could exist even in a life full of duty, even under the weight of expectation. The bond between them deepened further when Eli introduced her to storytelling. They would sit by the stream, the soft murmur of water providing a gentle rhythm, and Eli would tell tales of Earth, of humans exploring mountains, sailing seas, and creating art. He spoke slowly, carefully choosing words that could be understood through gestures and simple language. Lysera listened, enraptured, and sometimes she would respond with drawings that reflected the story, adding her own imagination. One story was about a small human child who helped a stranded bird return to its home. Eli acted out the movements, using hand gestures and expressions. Lysera followed, mimicking the gestures with precision, adding her own flourishes. At the end, she drew a bird flying among glowing trees, and when she showed it to Eli, her smile was radiant. It was as if she had lived the story herself, experiencing freedom and choice in ways her royal life rarely allowed. Eli realized that his presence was more than friendship. His human perspective, curiosity, creativity, patience, was influencing her in small but profound ways. He had not intended to change her life, and yet here she was, smiling, laughing, and exploring in ways she never had before. As they spent more time together, Eli began noticing subtle patterns in her behavior. She was learning to assert small choices, like which path to take through the forest or which sketches to show him first. She asked questions about the human world, seeking understanding, and sometimes even expressed opinions that challenged the rigid expectations of her court. These were small acts, almost invisible, but to Eli they were monumental. The princess was discovering herself, and he had the rare privilege of witnessing it. One day, Eli decided to try something new. He brought a small, handheld mirror and a set of paints. "I thought you might like to see yourself in color," he said. Lysera's eyes widened in curiosity. She hesitated, then gently touched the mirror. Her reflection shimmered in the strange Thalorian light, and she began painting her own portrait. Each stroke was careful, deliberate, but full of emotion. When she finished, she showed Eli, and he gasped softly. "You made this?" he asked. She nodded, a shy smile on her lips. "For you," she said, using the few words she had learned from him. Eli felt a warmth spread through his chest. He had not intended to make such a difference, and yet here it was, tangible and beautiful. As the sun began to set, Eli packed his things. "I have to go back now," he said softly. Lysera didn't speak, but she handed him the portrait. He took it carefully, feeling the weight of her trust and the bond they had formed. Walking back to the settlement, Eli reflected on the past days. Each moment spent with Lysera had shown him something about humanity, about kindness, patience, creativity, and the ability to connect across worlds. He had come to Thaloria to observe, to learn about an alien species, but he realized that he had also taught in his quiet way. He had given the princess moments of freedom, moments of joy, and perhaps even a small sense of choice. That night, Eli could not sleep. He thought about the princess's life, bound by rules and expectations, and yet in small ways he had shown her another path. He wondered what would happen next, how she would carry these moments into her daily life, and whether their friendship could continue despite the constraints of court life. He smiled, remembering her laughter, her curiosity, and the way her eyes had shone when she discovered something new. He realized that sometimes the smallest gestures could have the largest impact. A shared laugh, a gift, a story, or a simple smile could ripple across worlds, touching hearts in ways one could never fully predict. and as he drifted off to sleep, Eli felt a quiet hope. Perhaps humanity's greatest strength was not in technology, not in exploration, not even in diplomacy, but in the ability to connect, to inspire, and to bring joy, even in the most unexpected places. The days grew brighter in the forest as Eli and Princess Lysera continued to meet. Their friendship had become a quiet rhythm, a secret world where rules of the palace could not reach. Eli looked forward to every visit, wondering how he could inspire her next, while Lysera waited eagerly, sketches in hand, for the human who had shown her the joy of choice. One morning, Eli arrived carrying something larger than usual, a small projector that could display images in the air. He set it on a flat rock, and with a tap, stars and planets appeared, floating above them like a tiny universe. Lysera gasped, her eyes widening at the sight. She reached out, trying to touch the planets, and Eli moved his hand so hers could feel the soft, warm light. "These are stars," Eli explained slowly. "Planets and stars. People live far away from each other, but they look up at the same sky, and sometimes they dream the same dreams. Certain constellations were forbidden to be seen by the public, while others were carefully catalogued for study. Yet here, in this small human moment, the sky was free, and so were her thoughts." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a sketch, a forest under a sky filled with stars, some glowing softly, others shining brightly. She handed it to Eli. "For you," she said. Her voice was soft, uncertain, but full of meaning. Eli accepted the sketch with a smile, carefully placing it in his notebook. Each day, he realized, was not just about discovery. It was about connection, understanding, and trust. As the week progressed, Eli introduced Lysera to new concepts, simple games that involved counting patterns in leaves, constructing shapes with sticks, and even experimenting with shadows cast by the glowing plants. Lysera's laughter became more frequent, her movements more confident. She began to ask questions, not just about humans but about the world around her. She wondered why certain plants glowed, why the birds moved in strange patterns, and why humans found joy in such simple things. Eli answered as best he could, using gestures, drawings, and simple words. Sometimes Lysera would respond with her own interpretations, creating small stories with her sketches. Other times she would watch silently, absorbing the information, her eyes shining with curiosity. Eli realized that their exchange was more than learning. It was a bridge between two cultures, a way for ideas to flow where rules had previously blocked them. One afternoon, Eli noticed something unusual. As they sat by the stream, a small group of palace guards appeared at the edge of the forest. They were observing silently, their expressions unreadable. Eli felt a flicker of concern. He had always known that contact with the princess could be risky, but he had hoped the secrecy of the forest would keep them safe. Lysera, however, was not afraid. She stood up slowly, holding her sketches tightly. Eli followed, trying to think of a way to explain their presence without causing alarm. The guards approached carefully. One of them, taller than the others, stepped forward and spoke in the Thalorian language. Eli could not understand the words, but he could sense their meaning, curiosity mixed with caution. Lysera looked at Eli, her eyes steady. She gestured toward him, then to herself, then to the sketches. The guards paused, and one of them stepped closer to examine the drawings. Eli explained as best he could, pointing to himself, then to Lysera, then to the sketches of glowing trees, birds, and stars. Slowly, the guards' expression softened. They did not leave, but they did not intervene. Perhaps they were trying to understand this strange human influence on the princess. Over the next few days, the presence of the guards became a quiet reality. Eli continued to meet Lysera, careful to respect the limits imposed by their observation. The princess, however, did not let the attention stop her joy. She continued to explore, to create, and to laugh. Eli admired her courage. Even under watchful eyes, she found freedom in small acts, choosing which sketches to share, deciding which paths to explore, and smiling when she discovered something new. Eli decided it was time to show her a new form of human creativity. He brought a simple musical device, one that could play tunes when small keys were pressed. Lysera had never heard such sounds. At first she hesitated, unsure how to interact with the strange object. But Eli encouraged her, showing her how each key created a different note. Slowly, she began to experiment, pressing combinations of keys and listening to the patterns. Soon, she was creating small melodies, her fingers moving gracefully across the device. The sound filled the forest, blending with the rustling leaves and the bubbling stream. Eli watched in awe as Lysera smiled, lost in the music. For the first time, he realized how much she had changed. She was no longer just the reserved princess bound by rules. She was a creator, an explorer, and a student of both the human and Thalorian worlds. Word of Eli's presence and his unusual influence on the princess began to reach the palace. Some advisors whispered to each other, concerned about the human's intentions. They wondered if he was trying to change the princess, to influence her decisions, or to introduce dangerous ideas. Yet, despite their caution, none dared to intervene directly. The princess, emboldened by her new confidence, began asserting small choices in the palace, deciding which lessons to attend, which duties to complete first, and even suggesting new ways to organize her own time. Eli noticed these changes during his meetings. Lysera would talk about her day at the palace, describing how she had asked a guard to help her in a way that was not usual for a princess. She laughed as she told him about her small victories, and Eli felt a deep sense of pride. He had not intended to change her life, yet here she was, discovering autonomy and joy in ways he could hardly imagine. One day, Eli decided to introduce a collaborative project. He brought a large sheet of paper, along with colored inks and brushes. "Let's make something together," he said. Lysera's eyes lit up. She picked up a brush and began drawing, while Eli added shapes, colors, and patterns alongside her. They worked silently for hours, their hands moving in harmony, creating a large, vibrant piece that combined human and Thalorian styles. As they finished, they stepped back to admire their work. Lysera's eyes were wide with amazement, and she smiled broadly. Eli realized that this was more than art. It was a symbol of their friendship, a tangible representation of connection, understanding, and mutual respect. The princess had learned to trust herself, to explore creativity, and to embrace the joy of discovery. But not everyone in the palace was pleased. One afternoon, as Eli returned to the forest, he noticed a small group of advisors waiting near the edge. Their expressions were serious, and their presence was deliberate. Eli's heart sank. He had always known that his influence could be controversial, but he had hoped that the secrecy of the forest would protect him and Lysera. Lysera, however, did not panic. She took Eli's hand briefly, a gesture of reassurance, and then turned to face the advisors. Using simple gestures and drawings, she explained what they had been doing: the games, the music, the art, and the stories. Eli watched as she spoke with confidence and clarity, her voice steady, her expressions honest. The advisors listened, their initial suspicion giving way to curiosity. By the end of the day, a compromise was reached. Eli was allowed to continue meeting with Lysera under the careful observation of the palace. It was not ideal, but it was enough. More importantly, Lysera had learned something vital. She had a voice, and she could use it to protect the things she loved. Over the following weeks, their meetings continued with a new understanding. Eli introduced more human ideas, simple problem-solving games, storytelling exercises, and even small experiments with light and shadow. Lysera absorbed everything with enthusiasm, creating her own interpretations and adding her unique perspective. Their work together became a quiet revolution, a way for the princess to explore her world and herself. One evening, as the sun set and the forest glowed in warm hues, Eli and Lysera sat by the stream, sharing a final moment before he returned to the settlement. Lysera handed him a new sketch, one that showed the forest filled with stars, birds, and strange creatures. At the center was a small human figure, holding hands with a Thalorian princess. Eli looked at the drawing, then at Lysera. Her eyes met his, and for the first time she spoke clearly. As he walked back to the settlement, Eli reflected on the days that had passed. He had come to Thaloria to observe, to learn about an alien culture, but he had discovered something far more important: the power of empathy, patience, and quiet creativity. Small acts, gestures of kindness, and shared experiences could ripple outward, changing lives in ways no one could predict. Eli knew that challenges lay ahead. The palace was still cautious, and not everyone would welcome the changes he and Lysera were quietly creating. But for the first time, he felt that their work together could matter, that humanity's presence could inspire not just understanding, but joy, freedom, and growth. That night as he lay in his quarters, Eli thought of Lysera sketching in the forest, her smile bright against the darkening sky. He realized that even unintended actions could have profound effects. A shared laugh, a simple gift, or a story told with patience could transform lives. And in that quiet understanding, Eli felt hope, a hope that human curiosity, kindness, and ingenuity could touch even the farthest corners of the universe. The palace was quieter than usual as Eli made his way through the gates. A sense of tension hung in the air. Over the past weeks, whispers had begun to circulate among the advisors and traditionalists. Some were uneasy with the changes in Princess Lysera, the laughter that seemed to linger longer than usual, the sketches she shared openly, the small acts of independence she now took within the palace walls. They did not understand the source of this transformation, and their unease had begun to turn into suspicion. Eli arrived at the edge of the forest where he always met Lysera. She was already there, waiting with her sketchpad in hand. The first thing he noticed was the seriousness in her eyes. Gone was the carefree smile from their last meeting. Eli approached slowly. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Lysera nodded, but her fingers trembled slightly as she held the sketchpad. She pointed toward the palace, then made a series of gestures that Eli understood to mean that some advisors had tried to stop her from leaving earlier. She glanced at him, and he nodded in understanding. "We will be careful," he said softly. They began their usual activities, drawing and exploring, but Eli noticed the princess's hesitation. Every laugh was smaller, every movement more measured. It was clear that the shadow of palace scrutiny weighed heavily on her. Eli knew he needed to do something, not to defy the palace, but to support Lysera in finding her own voice. Over the next few days, Eli encouraged Lysera to experiment with small acts of self-expression. He brought new materials for sketching, a small collection of natural pigments, and even simple tools for creating shapes with light. They worked quietly, carefully, ensuring that their activities remained subtle enough not to draw undue attention. But the traditionalists were persistent. One morning, a stern-faced advisor appeared at the edge of the forest, flanked by two guards. Eli and Lysera froze. The advisor's expression was sharp, his movements precise. He did not speak to Eli directly, but gestured toward Lysera, then made motions that clearly demanded her immediate return to the palace. Lysera's hands shook slightly, but she took a deep breath and shook her head. She gestured toward Eli, then made motions indicating that she wished to continue her time in the forest. The advisor frowned, clearly not used to being refused. Eli stepped forward carefully, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. He used the few Thalorian words he had learned, combined with gestures and drawings, to explain that their time together was for learning, creativity, and cultural exchange. Slowly, the advisor's expression softened, though the tension remained. After a long pause, he signaled for the guards to step back. Lysera let out a quiet sigh of relief. That afternoon, Eli and Lysera talked about the incident. "They don't understand," she said softly, flipping through her sketches. "They think happiness is dangerous." She began to draw again, but this time with determination. Her lines were bolder, her colors brighter. She drew scenes of the forest filled with laughter, light, and music, showing humans and Thalorians together, exploring and learning. Eli watched, feeling a swell of pride. She was using her creativity not just for herself, but as a quiet form of courage, a message to those who doubted her. The days that followed were filled with both progress and tension. Eli continued to teach Lysera, introducing new games and exercises that encouraged problem-solving and imagination. They experimented with light and shadow, creating moving shapes that danced across the forest floor. Lysera's confidence grew. She began to propose her own ideas, arranging sketches and objects in ways Eli had never expected. Yet, the palace's watchful eyes never fully disappeared. Guards occasionally appeared at a distance, and messages arrived warning Eli to remain cautious. The traditionalists were worried that the princess was being influenced too strongly by human ideas. But Eli remained patient, careful not to provoke them while still supporting Lysera's growth. One evening, as the forest glowed under the soft light of Thaloria's twin moons, Eli had an idea. He brought a small musical device he had modified to combine light and sound. When a key was pressed, it would create both a note and a shifting pattern of light across the forest. Lysera's eyes widened at the sight. "Try it," Eli said softly. She hesitated, then placed her fingers on the keys. Music filled the air and light moved across the trees in waves of color. She laughed, her face lighting up in a way Eli had not seen since they first met. Together, they experimented with melodies and patterns, creating a performance that felt alive. For a few precious hours, they were free from rules, free from watchful eyes, free to simply create. But the traditionalists could not be ignored forever. One afternoon, a message arrived at Eli's quarters. It was simple but firm. Any human interference with the princess's duties would be carefully monitored, and continued disobedience could result in restrictions on both Eli and Lysera. Eli understood the gravity. Their time in the forest was safe, but they were entering new territory, where the rules of the palace could not be ignored. When Eli arrived at the forest clearing that afternoon, Lysera was waiting, her expression thoughtful. "They are afraid," she said quietly, "afraid of what they do not understand. Not with force, but with patience, creativity, and kindness. That is how we change minds." It would be a way to show that creativity, joy, and exploration could exist alongside tradition, not against it. Lysera agreed, eager to share her discoveries in a controlled, thoughtful way. The exhibition was arranged in a small, secure area near the palace gardens. Lysera's sketches were displayed alongside simple human inventions, and Eli prepared demonstrations of light and music. When the advisors and a few select guards arrived, the princess stepped forward. She spoke with confidence, using the few Thalorian words she had learned from Eli, combined with gestures and illustrations. She explained the purpose of their work, not to defy tradition but to explore creativity, understanding, and empathy. The audience was quiet, observing carefully. As they experienced the music, the lights, and the artwork, murmurs of surprise and curiosity spread through the group. The traditionalists, initially skeptical, began to understand the gentle power of what Eli and Lysera had created. They saw the princess smiling, confident, and in control of her own choices. Slowly, their expressions softened, their suspicion giving way to cautious acceptance. After the exhibition, Eli and Lysera returned to the forest. The tension had eased slightly, but Eli knew challenges remained. Change in the palace was slow, deliberate, and often resisted. Yet the princess had discovered something vital: her own voice, her ability to make choices, and the courage to express herself even under scrutiny. That night, as they sat by the stream, Eli reflected on what had happened. He realized that his presence had not only given Lysera freedom and joy, but it had also begun to influence the palace itself. The advisors who had watched carefully were now reconsidering their assumptions. They had seen firsthand that creativity and happiness did not weaken tradition, they enhanced it. Lysera turned to Eli, her eyes bright. "I feel stronger," she said softly, "because of you." It was the kind of smile that Eli had never expected to see when he first arrived, a smile born of courage, curiosity, and the quiet power of choice. As they prepared to leave the forest that evening, Eli felt a profound sense of hope. They had faced challenges, navigated fear and suspicion, and still, the princess had found her voice. He realized that this was the true strength of humanity, not in force or dominance, but in patience, empathy, and the ability to inspire others to discover their own potential. Eli knew that their journey was far from over. The palace would continue to watch, and traditionalists would continue to resist. Yet, for the first time, he believed that meaningful change was possible. Through kindness, creativity, and trust, they could influence not just one life but perhaps the culture of an entire world. And as they walked back to the settlement, Eli glanced at Lysera. Her sketchpad was full of new ideas, her eyes sparkled with confidence, and her smile shone brighter than ever. He realized that even unintended actions, small gestures, shared laughter, and quiet encouragement could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. For the first time, Eli understood that true influence was not about power or authority. It was about connection. It was about giving someone the freedom to explore, to create, and to be themselves. And in doing so, they could change the world, one small smile at a time. The palace seemed quieter than usual that morning, yet the air was filled with a sense of anticipation. News of the princess's recent activities had begun to spread quietly among the citizens of Thaloria. Word of her sketches, her experiments with light and sound, and her newfound confidence had reached even the common people. For the first time in many cycles, the name of Princess Lysera inspired curiosity and admiration, rather than strict respect or fear. Eli approached the forest clearing, carrying a small satchel filled with objects he thought the princess might enjoy, a few mechanical birds, a simple music box, and colored inks. He stepped carefully, mindful of the soft glow beneath the trees. When he arrived, Lysera was already there, sitting beneath her favorite tree. She held a sketchpad filled with vibrant scenes, some depicting humans, others the creatures of Thaloria, and some a blend of both. Her eyes brightened when she saw him, and she waved excitedly. "I brought new things," Eli said softly, setting down his satchel. Lysera's face lit up with joy. She stood quickly, taking his hand for a moment before releasing it to examine the mechanical birds. She set them down on the ground and watched with fascination as they moved and flapped their wings. Eli smiled as she laughed, the sound clear and musical, blending with the gentle rustle of the forest. "You're learning so fast," he said gently. "You make them move even better than I do. I want to create things that make others happy too." She experimented with the music box, learning how different sequences of keys created harmony. She arranged the mechanical birds in patterns that mimicked the movement of real creatures, and she drew scenes of the forest under starlight. Eli offered guidance when needed, but mostly he stepped back, watching her creativity flourish. As the day wore on, Lysera looked at him seriously. "Eli, the palace," she said quietly, "they are starting to understand. I feel free." She spoke with confidence, explaining the purpose behind each piece, not as a challenge to tradition, but as a way to inspire, to teach, and to connect. The palace advisors were cautious at first. They worried that human influence was changing the princess too quickly, that she might abandon her duties or make reckless decisions. Yet as they observed her interactions, they could not deny the impact. She was happier, more confident, and her decisions were thoughtful. She demonstrated creativity without carelessness, independence without rebellion. Slowly, respect replaced suspicion. Eli watched quietly as Lysera's influence began to ripple outward. Guards smiled when she passed, courtiers approached with questions about her work, and even the strictest advisors began to see the value in her approach. Small changes in behavior led to small changes in perception, and soon, the atmosphere of the palace shifted. The people of Thaloria were beginning to see that joy, creativity and freedom could coexist with responsibility and tradition. One afternoon, Eli and Lysera decided to take their work to the palace gardens. With careful planning, they arranged an exhibition of sketches, mechanical birds, music devices, and light experiments. Citizens and select palace members were invited to observe. The princess stood at the center, explaining each piece with clarity and confidence. The audience was captivated. They saw a Thalorian princess who could think independently, create beauty, and inspire others. They saw a human who had introduced empathy, curiosity, and patience without demanding change or breaking rules. And most importantly, they saw the harmony between two cultures, Thalorian and human, working together to create something extraordinary. After the exhibition, Lysera turned to Eli. "They understand now," she said softly. "They see that happiness and creativity are not threats." Lysera handed Eli a new sketch, one that depicted the forest filled with light, music, and movement. At the center were two figures, one human, one Thalorian, holding hands beneath a star-filled sky. Eli studied the drawing, feeling the weight of its meaning. "This is beautiful," he said softly. "It shows everything we've done together. A future where people can be free, even within rules. A future where we can create, explore, and be happy." Through patience, kindness, and creativity, they had created ripples of understanding and inspiration that would continue long after their meetings in the forest. Weeks passed, and Lysera continued to grow. She organized creative sessions for other young Thalorians, teaching them games, drawing techniques, and simple musical experiments. The palace began to embrace these activities, recognizing the value in fostering curiosity and joy. Eli continued to support her, always from a respectful distance, offering ideas, guidance, and encouragement. One morning, as the two sat beneath the glow of the trees, Lysera turned to Eli with a thoughtful expression. "Do you know why I smile now?" she asked. Eli shook his head gently. "Because you're happy." He had only wanted to observe, to learn, and perhaps to share small pieces of human culture. Yet here was Lysera, transformed by curiosity, patience, and friendship. Their work culminated in a celebration at the palace. Citizens gathered to view Lysera's creations, to hear music she had arranged, and to witness the harmony of two cultures coming together. The atmosphere was filled with warmth and excitement. Eli watched as Lysera moved through the crowd, sharing her ideas, smiling freely, and inspiring others. At the end of the celebration, Lysera approached Eli, her hands holding a small, glowing seed from the forest. "For you," she said, placing it in his hand. "A reminder of where it all began." "I will treasure it," he said softly. Lysera smiled, a radiant, confident smile that spoke of courage, choice, and joy. Eli realized that this was the true reward of his journey, the knowledge that human empathy, creativity, and patience could touch lives, even across worlds. As night fell, Eli walked back to his quarters, the seed carefully tucked away. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the accidental encounter in the forest, the shared laughter, the drawings, music, and stories. He understood now that true impact did not require force or authority. It required connection, patience, and the courage to inspire. The next morning, Eli returned to the forest one last time before departing Thaloria for another mission. Lysera was waiting, holding her sketchpad filled with new creations. She greeted him with the same bright smile that had first welcomed him weeks ago, and he felt a warmth spread through his chest. "You've changed my life," she said softly. Eli shook his head, smiling gently. "No, Lysera, you changed your life. I only showed you that it was possible." Eli studied it, understanding the meaning immediately, a symbol of harmony, hope, and connection. As he prepared to leave Thaloria, Eli looked back one last time at the forest, at the princess, at the vibrant life they had nurtured together. He realized that even small, unintended actions, a shared laugh, a story, a gift, a smile, could ripple across worlds and change lives in ways that could never be fully predicted. And as the shuttle lifted into the sky, Eli carried with him the memory of a smile, radiant and true, a symbol of hope, growth, and the quiet power of humanity. He knew that wherever humans went in the universe, they had the ability to inspire, to connect, and to bring light to lives that had never known such joy. Princess Lysera stood in the forest clearing, watching the shuttle disappear. She held her sketchpad to her chest, a small smile playing on her lips. She had discovered freedom, joy, and creativity. She had learned to trust herself. And she knew, deep in her heart, that the choices she made from now on would shape not only her own life but the lives of all those around her. For the first time in years, she smiled fully, completely, and without hesitation. And it was because of a human who had walked into her world, not to change it, but to share it.